All right. Hey, everyone. I'm here to talk with you about cybernetic Big Five theory, and this is also known as CB5T. This was developed by Cohen DeYoung in a paper that was published in 2014. So before we go forward with anything else, I would like to go over the learning objectives for today. As we've talked about, I like for these lectures to have components that you're able to take away and use. I want them to be purposeful. I want you to feel like you've gained something out of these. So what will you get out of this one? First, I want to do is go over the cybernetic Big Five personality theory. And so with that, we're going to go over what cybernetics are, how it relates to Big Five, and what the differences are with this and the regular Big Five personality theory. And I also want you to be able to comprehend and apply these by answering some activity questions towards the end that I think will allow you to do that. And then that goes into the third goal. I want this to be something that you can take with you. So I hope you understand these and are able to apply them to the people you see and even to yourself. As a clinician, personality is something that I definitely take into account. There are different therapeutic interventions that work better with different personality traits. And it also affects the outlook of treatment. So these are all very important factors to consider clinically. So first, we're going to go over some definitions. First, we'll talk about cybernetic systems. Cybernetic systems are those that are self-regulating via feedback mechanisms, and they are also goal-directed. So they have an aim, they have something they're shooting for, they're going along and they receive information from the environment and things that are built within them that allow them to make progress towards that goal and reroute when necessary. It's a good example of this would be an autopilot system in an airplane. So it has its destination. It's able to track where it is in space and redirect when it needs to based on the feedback it receives from the environment and in order to get to where it's supposed to go. So for the next two, I use the exact definition that he offered in his article, Cohen DeYoung. Personality, probabilistic descriptions of relatively stable patterns of emotions, motivation. So the difference between emotions and motivation would be a motivation is more of an evolutionary biological drive, you could say. So it'd be like thirst or hunger. Those are things. Those aren't emotions. They're motivations. They're telling you to do something. Cognition and behavior in response to classes of stimuli that have been present in human cultures over evolutionary time. So they are relatively stable. And they also, he mentions evolution here. So with that, what he's trying to nod to is these are universal, non-specific traits. These are traits of humanity, not individuals. And so, like, again, quench thirst. That is something that is something that everyone experiences. Characteristic adaptations are a little different. This is another difference besides the actual difference in the way he stratifies and the other components that he has in his personality hierarchy. Characteristic adaptations make this a little bit different too. It makes it more flexible. So these are relatively stable goals, interpretations, and strategies specified in relation to an individual's particular life circumstances. So then, individual's particular life circumstances, that's a lot different. These are specific. These are non-universal. They're unique to the individual. They are the goals, interpretations, and strategies, which we'll get into in just a moment, are different based on the experiences of the person. And this makes it much more flexible as far as the way these mechanisms work. So the example I put here, create a PowerPoint lecture. This is something that I've done, but this isn't something that someone else will necessarily do. Then there's the Big Five, and like I said, you might know it already, but they are composed. The Big Five is composed of extroversion, neuroticism, openness. It's openness to experience, and it's also intellect. And so I just put openness, but we'll go into that, and conscientiousness and agreeableness. Now we're going to go through the cybernetic stages, and I'm going to try to go quickly so that I'll have time to get to the activities. So it starts with goal activation. This is the first stage. This is when you actually you're aroused to go toward a goal. You see a goal, and it's so there are two different ways of looking at this. The goal is calling you toward, or something is pushing you toward the goal. And so the former would be the phenomenological viewpoint. There is something inside the construct, innate in the construct, that is actually calling you, or it's more of the Freudian drive that something's behind you pushing you. Either way, that's what happens in stage one. So the goal is activated. So now you're going to figure out what action you want to take that will get you to that goal. And so it's purely hypothetical. Then you actually implement the action. And so there is a bottleneck effect at this stage, which will come into it. I'll talk more about that later. But this is when you actually carry out the action that you determine would be the most suitable for getting you toward that goal. Then after you complete the action, it's outcome interpretation, which means you're going to look at the state of the world after you've completed the action and just see what that is. Then at goal comparison, you're going to compare the state of the world to the goal that you had. Now, to the degree that those are the same, you're going to start another process. You have basically achieved that goal. You're going to move on to something else. But if there's a mismatch, you detect a mismatch there, you're going to start over back at stage one. And the problem with that is you don't know where the error was just at the beginning. You have to go through it to figure that out. It could be at goal activation, the goal itself. There could be a problem with the goal. The action that you've selected could be dysfunctional. And the action itself could be wrong. It could be different from the action you actually selected. So that makes it difficult. The way you interpreted the world afterwards could be wrong, or the comparison you made, then the mismatch, the level to which you detected the mismatch could be dysfunctional, or could just be inaccurate also. So just briefly, that's all oftentimes associated with anxiety or depression, that the way that someone sees the world, they're going to be more sensitive to the mismatch or to the threat of their cybernetic system. So to go back to the bottleneck, the reason why that's important is because, going through these, you'd think that this has to be more dynamic than this. It can't just be this linear progression, and it's not. There is a bottleneck effect at the action stage, because essentially we only do one action at a time. So then at each stage basically has to wait its turn for the action to go through. And that allows us to use this more linear model, but it is indeed a dynamic process. And just real quick, just to look over here, this is from the article. Genes in the environment both affect these cybernetic stages, which then affect personality traits, which then have an effect on characteristic adaptations. And then this sends information back to the cybernetic stages, like we just talked about, also sends it back to the environment. The environment has an impact on the characteristic adaptations, and you can see how dynamic this really is. So this is the personality hierarchy that Colin DeYoung came up with in this article. And so you see here, he's got the big five: neuroticism, agreeableness, conscientiousness, extroversion, openness / intellect. He also has a few more though. So he has these aspects down here. Each one of the big five has been broken down into two more, what he calls aspects. And then there are also these two here. So essentially a line here between these two, and then they can be clustered under two higher level domains. So we'll start with neuroticism. And again, I'm going through it pretty quickly just to make sure we have time. But this is negatively associated with stability, and the other two are normal relationships. So this would be low neuroticism, high agreeableness, high conscientiousness lead to high stability. And stability is basically trying to protect characteristic adaptations. So you want your goals, interpretations, and strategies to remain stable. Plasticity, an important distinction here. The opposite of stability is not plasticity. The opposite of stability is instability. The opposite of plasticity is not stability, it is rigidity. So plasticity is more of that exploratory behavior. You're open to the idea or the notion that new information could have a positive impact on your goals, interpretations, and strategies that would affect your characteristic adaptations, and that would affect that cybernetic process. And so you're more open to that, to the positive aspects of the unknown. Stability, high stability, you're more likely to be wary of that. So neuroticism is largely threat detection, and that can be broken down into withdrawal and volatility. With withdrawal is it's passive avoidance. So it's largely associated with anxiety and depression. It's trying just to stay away from the threat. You notice they're a threat, but you're going to avoid or just stay away from it. And in anxiety, it can be thought of as entropy. So it could be telling you that whatever behavior that you are implementing is incorrect, you need to change course. Or it could tell you that you just don't know your environment and you don't know which direction to go in because you haven't experienced it before. Basically, that's when you are in the total unknown. Your schema for that is no longer relevant because you've never experienced it before. Now, volatility. So with withdrawal, it's more the passive avoidance. Volatility is active defense. So that's more associated with anger. And so it's a quick note. All neuroticism in general is associated with negatively valenced emotions. So I've mentioned anxiety, depression, and now anger with volatility. And anger, volatility, its function, its mechanism is to either avoid or destroy the threat. And that's what anger usually does. A lot of times when people are angry, they have a desire to destroy the obstacle or the threat that is there. So agreeableness is broken down into the aspects of compassion and politeness. Compassion is essentially empathy, the ability to feel the feelings of others and have that joining relationship. And you can see how the ability to do that would affect stability because you are able to build more stable social relationships. So that's more of the building aspect of the social relationships. Politeness is more of the maintenance. So with politeness, that's the tendency to abide by social norms, the social contract. And you're not going to stick out in the crowd. You're going to stay at the level of the group. You're not going to make yourself known. You're not going to make any waves. You just want to maintain that social order. Conscientiousness it's broken down into industriousness and orderliness, and it has a strong positive relationship with life success. Industriousness is essentially discipline. So it's one's ability to put off short-term satisfaction in order to and keep long-term positive outcomes in mind. And orderliness is associated with organization, being orderly, and it's really the maintenance of what you know. And it's kind of the idea of trying to avoid the unknown that I was talking about over here with neuroticism. If you keep everything where it's supposed to and you know exactly where it is, you're not running into anomaly. You're not experiencing entropy. And so that again is associated with stability. So now that's you can think of that as one cluster. Over here in plasticity, again, this is more exploratory behavior. You have extroversion, which is largely associated with sociability. But while that is true, that's in the cybernetic mechanism, it has a lot to do with goal-related behavior. Enthusiasm is associated with consummatory reward. And it's worth noting, extroversion as a whole is associated with positively valenced emotions, whereas neuroticism was negatively valenced. So enthusiasm, consummatory reward, that's the level of satisfaction that a person gets when they achieve something, or even the level of excitement they experience at the idea of achieving something. Now, assertiveness is a little different in this context than just standing out or being socially aggressive would be one way of looking at it. In this, it's incentive reward. It's being able to recognize that you're on the track of your goals. And the relation to positively valenced emotions in extroversion is due to its association with dopamine. In assertiveness, the incentive reward is actually more associated with higher levels of dopamine than consummatory reward. So the old saying, anticipation is better than fulfillment, is actually true at a neuro psychological level. And so this is the ability to be able to detect that you're on the track of your goal, not necessarily that you're getting it, that you're on the track. Openness to experience and intellect. Intellect is the ability to detect abstract and serial or logical patterns. And that's a strong left brain function. And an openness to experience is more that spatial, temporal detection of patterns, or the detection of spatial and temporal patterns, I should say. That's more of a right brain function, that holistic view of the world. So here is a chart of all these. You can see again, the negative pole of stability is unstable, and then the negative pole of plasticity is rigidity. And yeah, I don't think I went into agreeableness at this level, at the big five level. It's essentially altruism and cooperation. And it's, like coordinating the goals and interpretations and strategies with those of others. So again, that has a strong impact on stability because you have these significant relationships with other people that make your environment more stable. And I'll be brief with this. This is just describing. So this is a characteristic adaptation, interpretation, strategies, and goals. And when I was mentioning the unknown, that when your interpretation is unknown, or you cannot determine a strategy, or you don't know what your goal is, that can all lead you into the unknown. So let's say that wherever you are right now in the current state is a place you've never been before. Your past experiences, which really inform your action formation stage 2. You've never been here before, so you can't rely on any past experiences. You're completely in chaos, entropy, the unknown. And so, but the thing about that is, out here in the unknown also has all the information that you need to be able to deal with it. It has all the danger, but all of the promise as well. So someone who's more neurotic is going to see more of the threatening side of the unknown. Someone who is higher in openness is able to see more of the positive aspects of the unknown. And then if used properly, you reintegrate, and these are different shapes here. That's a rectangle, and this is more of a circle. And that's what signify a change, that you change something there. So I have a few class activities. We'll do a couple here, then I want to get to the other one for sure. So the first one, an individual is low in neuroticism, high in agreeableness, and high in conscientiousness. This individual can be more broadly described as high in stability. That would be those all make up the cluster of stability. And we're going to go ahead and skip to this one. So I think this is really important to cover. So personality is essentially normally distributed. So there are slight differences. But what that means is along the distribution, there are pros and cons, evolutionarily speaking, to each one of these, to every part of the personality spectrum, all along there. So one thing to do, you could look at the pros and cons of each level of the personality trait. So I mentioned high openness, for example. High in openness, you're more likely to see the positive aspects of the unknown. Since we're constantly surrounded by the unknown, that our understanding is limited, that could really come in handy. That you're constantly into that creative space, because that's where all the new information comes from. The things that you already know are going to fall away and decay because the environment's always changing, the world's always changing. So you're more likely to be able to get that new information that could help you. Also, it can be dangerous on the unknown. There's a reason why people can be afraid to have that threat detection too. There's a reason why that high neuroticism exists, and so it can be dangerous out in the unknown. Now, low in neuroticism, this is probably pretty easy to conceptualize, and extremely low in neuroticism could even be psychopathy. But you're not sensitive to threats. They're not detecting mismatches. Everything seems pretty stable all the time. But the fact that you're not detecting them does not mean that they don't exist. So you could be missing out on some really valuable information about dysfunction in your behavior or the way that you formulate the world. Just skipping around, low agreeableness. Right off the bat, someone might think that, well, this person doesn't get along with anybody, and that would definitely be a con. They aren't able to form any long-lasting relationships. But they could also stand up for what they believe in and question things that they don't feel like are correct. And that's important. If we all agree on everything, then that can lead to some really destructive consequences. And so someone being willing to stand up for their own perspective of the world can really can update the way the group thinks. And so I was going to go through some theatrical examples. I'm just going to go through, we won't discuss these right now. Michael Scott, Homer Simpson, Albus Dumbledore. You can kind of think what their personality traits might be like. But what I really want you to think about, let me move this. Is what your personality traits are. And in this model, in the Cybernetic Big Five model, and just on your own with time, you could meditate on your own personality traits. And we'll stop there.